Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Social Work, SOSW, Bachelor of Social Work, BFSW, Semester I, BSW, 121 Professional Social Work and its Values, Block-1 Introduction to Professional Social Work, Unit-3 Emergence of Social Work Abroad, 3.0 Objectives. Social work as a professional discipline evolved in the West, mainly in Europe and America. Today the profession is practiced in many continents and countries of the world including Africa and Asia. After studying this unit you should be able to trace the history and evolution of social work as a professional discipline, delve into the historical roots of social work profession in UK and USA. Trace the emergence of social work education and training in North America and Europe and other areas of the world, and get a glimpse of the current trends in professional social work. 3.1 Introduction. Social work is a professional discipline and at present is being practiced in numerous settings and in many countries. Social workers today are employed in governmental, non-governmental, private, industrial and corporate settings and also work as private practitioners. Since evolving as a profession in UK and USA, it has now spread to other countries of Europe, Latin America, Australia, Asian and African countries. Social work emerged as a profession early in the 20th century and today is the profession charged with fulfilling the social welfare mandate of promoting well-being and quality of life of people across continents. It is a field of study that has uniquely blended perspectives from other disciplines, particularly the biological and social sciences, with its own values, knowledge, and skills. The philosophical and historical basis of social work and social welfare form the backbone of the profession. Trends in contemporary practice can be better understood in the context of the history of social work profession and practice. A historical perspective gives insight into the attitudes about persons receiving social work services, evolution of the different social work methods, and the nature of training and education that emerged for those volunteering to provide help in a more systematic way. 3.2 History of social work in the United Kingdom. In primitive society, sometimes referred as the folk society, the larger family or tribe took over the support of those whose needs were not satisfied in the normal way. Children deprived of parental support were taken into the homes of relatives or adopted by childless couples. Food resources were shared among relatives and neighbors. In course of time, when the feudal system gave way to the wage economy, legislation was enacted to compel the poor to work. Role of the church in Europe. In the early Christian era, the folk tradition continued and the faithful considered it a religious obligation to care for those members of the group who could not care for themselves. Religion provided the greatest motivation for charity. The church, especially the monasteries, became the centers for distributing food, medical aid and shelter. Alms were collected in the parish and distributed by the parish priest and other clergymen who knew the individuals and their situation. Welfare becomes a state responsibility. The shift from church responsibility to government responsibility for relief is seen first in the restrictive legislation forbidding begging and vagrancy. In England between 1350 and 1530, a series of laws were enacted, known as the Statutes of Labourers, designed to force the poor to work. The decreasing authority of the church and the increasing tendency to shift responsibility to governmental authorities gave rise in England to a series of measures which culminated in the famous Elizabethan Poor Law of 1601. The Elizabethan Poor Law 1601. The Poor Law of 1601 was a codification of the preceding poor relief legislation. The statute represented the final form of poor law legislation in England after 3 generations of political, religious, and economic changes that required government action. The law distinguished 3 classes of the poor. 1. The able-bodied poor were called sturdy beggars and were forced to work in the house of correction or workhouse. Those who refused to work in the house of correction were put in the stocks or in jail. 2. The impotent poor were people unable to work: the sick, the old, the blind, the deaf-mute, the lame, the demented, and mothers with young children. They were placed in the almshouse where they were to help within the limits of their capacities. If they had a place to live, they were given outdoor relief in the form of food, clothes, and fuel. 3. Dependent children were orphans and children who had been deserted by their parents or those whose parents were so poor that they could not support them. Children 8 years and older were able to do some domestic and other work. Were indentured with a townsman. The Poor Law of 1601 set the pattern of public relief under governmental responsibility for Great Britain for 300 years. It established the principle that the local community, namely the parish, had to organize and finance poor relief for its residents. The overseers of the poor administered the poor law in the parish. Their function was to receive the application of the poor person for relief, to investigate his or her condition, and to decide whether he or she was eligible for relief. Influence of the Elizabethan Poor Law. Though there were similar reform plans advocated in Europe, it is the Poor Law of 1601, sometimes known as 43 Elizabeth, which was most influential in the development of public welfare and social work. There are several important principles in the English Poor Law which continue to have a dominating influence on welfare legislation 4 centuries later. 1. The principle of the state's responsibility for relief is universally adopted and has never been seriously questioned. It is in tune with democratic philosophy as well as with the principle of the separation of church and state. 2. The principle of local responsibility for welfare enunciated in the Poor Law goes back to 1388 and is designed to discourage vagrancy. It stipulates that sturdy beggars return to their birthplaces and seek relief there. 3. A third principle stipulated differential treatment of individuals according to categories: the deserving as against the undeserving poor, children, the aged, and the sick. This principle is based on the theory that certain types of unfortunate people have a greater claim on the community than other types. 4. The Poor Law also delineated family responsibility for aiding dependents. Children, grandchildren, parents, and grandparents were designated as legally liable relatives. The Elizabethan Poor Law was noteworthy and progressive when it was enacted. It has served as the basis for both English and American public welfare. The Poor Law Revisions, 1834 to 1909. In 1834, a parliamentary commission presented a report which aimed to revise the Elizabethan and post-Elizabethan poor laws. Upon the basis of the committee's report, legislation was enacted enunciating the following principles: a. Doctrine of least eligibility; b. Re-establishment of the workhouse test; and c. Centralization of control. The doctrine of least eligibility meant that the condition of paupers shall in no case be so eligible as the condition of persons of the lowest class subsisting on the fruits of their own industry. In other words, no person receiving aid was to be as well off. According to the second principle, the able-bodied poor could apply for assistance in the public workhouse, but refusal to accept the lodging and fare of the workhouse debarred them from qualifying for any aid. Outdoor relief was reduced to an absolute minimum. As per the third principle, a central authority consisting of 3 poor law commissioners had power to consolidate and coordinate poor law services throughout the land. Parishes were no longer to be the administrative units. Between 1834 and 1909 there were numerous changes in poor law legislation, the cumulative effect of which was to veer the entire system away from the principles of 1834. The most important changes were those that began to develop specialized care for certain disadvantaged groups. For instance, for dependent children district schools and foster homes were provided, and for the insane and feeble-minded specialized institutions were started. A more positive approach to the poor laws can be seen in the Poor Law Report of 1909. The report stressed curative treatment and rehabilitation rather than repression, and provision for all in the place of the selective workhouse test. If the principles of 1834 provided a framework of repression, those of 1909 may be termed as the framework of prevention. The Beveridge Report. In 1942, Sir William Beveridge, chairman of the Interdepartmental Committee on Social Insurance and Allied Services, presented the committee's report to the government. The report emphasized four major principles: 1. Every citizen to be covered; 2. The major risks of loss of earning power, sickness, unemployment, accident, old age, widowhood, maternity to be included in a single insurance; 3. A flat rate of contribution to be paid regardless of the contributor's income; and 4. A flat rate of benefit to be paid, also without regard to income, as a right to all who qualify. Beveridge emphasized that the underlying social philosophy of his plan was to secure the British against want and other social evils. Everyone is entitled to benefits, which include maternity, sickness, unemployment, industrial injury, retirement, and grant for widows. The related services were family allowances, national health services, and national assistance. The Beveridge Report of 1942 takes its place as one of the great documents in English Poor Law History, 1601, 1834, 1909, and 1942. The report became the foundation of the modern social welfare legislation in UK, beginnings of the COS movement and settlement house movement in England, where the problem of competing and overlapping social services in London had been increasing over the years. A group of public-spirited citizens founded in 1869 the London Charity Organisation Society, COS. Octavia Hill and Samuel Barnett were two of the founders. In her work as housing reformer, Octavia Hill introduced a system of friendly rent collecting as a method of improving slum housing. Octavia Hill communicated to the volunteers certain principles or laws to be followed in their activities through weekly meetings and letters to fellow workers. She stressed that each case and each situation must be individualized. Everyone must be treated with respect for his or her privacy and independence. She advised her workers not to judge the tenants by their personal standards. She believed in the value of dignity of even the most degraded of her tenants. Samuel Augustus Barnett was the founder of Toynbee Hall, the first settlement house, in which wealthy Oxford students settled in an attempt to improve living conditions in the slums of Whitechapel. The basic idea was to bring the educated in contact with the poor for their mutual benefit. Realization had dawned on the Christian socialists that mere distribution of charity does not solve problems. In order to better understand the situation of poverty and underdevelopment, one needed to live with the poor and listen to their problems. 3.3 History of Social Work in the United States of America. After outlining the beginnings in England, we shall now see the growth and spread of the social work profession in the United States. The English poor law legislations and related developments provided the background for the development of American systems of relief. The colonists from England, who came in the early and mid-17th century, brought with them English laws, customs, institutions and ideas and implanted these in America. Three social movements. During the last half of the 19th century, the US experienced an increase in social problems as a result of rapid industrialization, urbanization, and immigration, together with the massive growth of the population. In response to these problems, three social movements began that formed the basis for the development of the social work profession. 1. The charity organization societies, SOSW, movement, which began in 1877 in Buffalo, New York. 2. The settlement house movement, which began in 1886 in New York City. And 3. The child welfare movement, which was a result of several loosely related developments, notably the Children's Aid Society and the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which began in New York City in 1853 and 1875, respectively. Let us look at these movements in more detail as they form the basis for future developments. SOSW movement, the settlement house movement and the child welfare movement eventually made important contributions to the development of the social work profession, but it is in the SOSW movement that the origin of the profession is to be found. S. Humphreys Gurteen, an English cleric who had been impressed with charity organization in London, founded the first SOSW in the United States in Buffalo, New York, in 1877. The Buffalo SOSW served as a model for rapid development of similar organizations. Within 15 years, there were SOSW agencies in 1992 American cities. The beginning of professional approach to the problems of human need can be seen in the philosophy of SOSW movement. The scientific charity attitude adopted by the SOSW enabled them to understand and cure poverty and family disorganization rather than merely assisting the poor. The charity organizations wanted to apply science to social welfare in the same way that it had been applied to medicine and engineering. The SOSW leaders replaced chaotic charity with a rational system that would focus on investigation, coordination, and personal service. Each case was to be considered individually, thoroughly investigated and assigned to a friendly visitor. The techniques used by the friendly visitors consisted of personal attributes such as sympathy, tact, patience, and wise advice. The SOSW-friendly visitors, most of them women, are the true forerunners of today's social workers. Besides, the SOSW movement fostered the development of the family service agencies of today, the practice of family casework, family counseling, schools of social work, employment services, legal aid, and many other programs which are a part and parcel of social work today. In addition to these contributions, it also led to the establishment of the first social work publication, Charities Review, which was merged into the Survey in 1907 and continued publication until 1952. Settlement house movement. Another significant development of social services in America has been that of the social settlement house. Settlement houses in the United States began in the late 1800s and were modeled after Toynbee Hall, founded in England in 1884 by Samuel Barnett. Many settlement houses were established in cities across the country, including Chicago's Hull House, started by Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr in 1889. The settlement house movement, which combined social advocacy and social services, was a response to the social disorganization that resulted from widespread industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. Through group work and neighborhood organizing strategies, the settlement house workers established neighborhood centers and offered services such as citizenship training, adult education, counseling, recreation, and daycare. The settlement house workers were young, idealistic college graduates from wealthy families who lived among the poor as settlers and thereby experienced the harsh realities. For the most part, they were volunteers and community leaders and not employed as social work professionals. The settlement house leaders believed that by changing neighborhood they can improve communities, and by changing communities they can develop a better society. The seeds of social work methods, namely group work, social action and community organization, were thus sown in the settlement house movement. Child welfare movement, the Children's Aid Society, 1853, and the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, 1875, which began in New York City, formed the basic elements of a child welfare movement. However, the beginning of the child welfare movement can be traced back to 1729 when the Ursuline sisters established an institution in New Orleans for children of parents massacred by Indians. The child welfare agencies had limited aims. They were basically concerned with rescuing children from inadequate homes or from the streets and finding for them wholesome living situations. Once their goals were accomplished, the agencies considered their job to be over. 3.4 Evolution of social work methods. Many of the basic principles and methods upon which social work rests today are a direct offshoot from the above societies and movements. The keeping of careful case records, respect for the client as an individual, a rehabilitation approach to problems, an analysis of causes rather than blanket condemnation of behavior, all these were basic principles under which the early charity organization societies operated. Social work methods, namely casework, group work and community organization, will be dealt in detail in subsequent units. However, a brief outline of their evolution is given below. Social casework. Social casework is the first of the social work methods to be developed and is one of the most studied. Growing up largely in the voluntary agencies which were established after the cause movement began, social casework represents the accumulated and codified experience of workers in these agencies in books, namely Social Diagnosis, 1917, and What is Social Casework? 1922, Mary Richmond identified the first principles, theories, and methods of social casework, or social work with individuals. Social casework, according to Richmond, was comprised of 4 processes: insight into the individual, insight into the social environment, direct action mind upon mind, and indirect action through the social environment. Lyubov, 1965. In 1905, medical social work was established at Massachusetts General Hospital under the sponsorship of Dr. Richard C. Cabot for the purpose of studying the conditions under which patients live. In later years, Freudian concepts were gradually adopted by social agencies in their attempts to deal with less seriously disturbed people. Social workers took over with eagerness insights gained from psychological findings. Such concepts as the significance of unconscious factors in human behavior, the crucial importance in later life of the early formative years, and the implications of ambivalence, the feeling of two contradictory emotions at the same time, all proved highly workable and useful in casework. The newly developed psychological tests and the widespread use of the intelligence quotient (IQ) reinforced social work's interest in psychological processes. Group work and community organization. Social group work and community organization methodologies were gaining formal acceptance and recognition as interventions in the 1940s and 1950s. Group work, which uses small group interaction as a vehicle for social change, and community organization, which stresses change in larger groups and organizational units, both emphasized the situational context of behavioral change. Voluntary recreational agencies and settlement houses had begun the development of professional group work. The Community Chests and Councils of America, now United Community Funds and Councils of America, was established in 1918, officially inaugurating what is now called community organization. The inclusion of group work and community organization as acceptable social work methods marks a significant transformation in the social work profession. Previously, social work tended to be seen as identical to casework. The profession of social work, with its three major methods of practice, was firmly established as a skilled response to the needs of clients. The generalist model, the search for a common base of practice, was precipitated by a professional desire to unify the three methods of casework, group work, and community organization that make up social work practice. The multi-method approach or combined practice was popularized after the publication of the Hallis-Taylor Report, 1951. In the decades of the 1970s and 1980 as the generalist conception of practice gained recognition and acceptance. A number of models have been constructed that unify the three-method conception of social work practice into a generalist framework. 3.5 The quest for professional status. By the 1890s as there was a felt need and a strong desire among COS personnel for granting professional status to social work. Among the many reasons which contributed towards professionalism are: 1. First, professionalization was a major trend during that era. Medicine and engineering had demonstrated the wonders that could occur when science was applied to practical problems through the vehicle of a profession. 2. Second, most COS workers were individuals who needed to earn a living. They were interested in establishing their work as deserving a decent wage. 3. Third, a new class of women who were well educated and wanted careers outside of the home was emerging. Developing charity work into a full-fledged profession in which they would not be blocked because of their sex was a good strategy. 4. Fourth, paid charity workers as well as volunteers were discovering the immense complexity of the task they were facing. Helping people deal with social problems like family breakdown and poverty was as complicated as those performed by physicians or lawyers. Some sort of professional training and education was a felt need. It is on account of the above-mentioned reasons that by the late 1890s a powerful movement to develop training and research centers as well as train and equip people doing charity work was gaining momentum. Flexner's remarks on professional status, the question of whether social work is in fact a profession, has challenged social workers for nearly a century. Social work's professional status was evaluated by Abraham Flexner in 1915, and his conclusion has reverberated among social workers ever since. Flexner's speech, "Is Social Work a Profession?" delivered at the 1915 meeting of the Baltimore Conference on Charities and Correction, was an event of utmost significance. Flexner, a noted expert on professional education, delineated 6 attributes that he called earmarks of a profession. According to Flexner, professions involve essentially intellectual operations with large individual responsibility, derive their raw material from science and learning. This material they work up to a practical and definite end, poses an educationally communicable technique, tend to self-organization, and are becoming increasingly altruistic in motivation. Flexner concluded that as of 1915, social work was not yet a profession on account of the following: A. Because social work mediated between other professions, it did not have the responsibility or power of a true profession. B. While social work drew its body of knowledge, facts, and ideas from both the laboratory and seminars, it was not founded on a purposefully organized educational discipline. C. It did not possess the high degree of specialized competency required by a profession because of the broad scope that characterized social work practice at that time. Flexner, however, acknowledged the rapid evolution of a professional self-consciousness, recognized that social work was in the beginning stages of professionalization, and praised the altruistic motivation of social workers and their devotion to well-doing. Since the time Flexner publicly proclaimed the non-professional status of social work, there has been a zealous quest for professional status. The subsequent flurry of activity included expanding the number of schools of social work, forming a professional accreditation body, standardizing educational curricula, advocating training for all social workers, and holding a series of conferences to testify to the singular, generic nature of social work skills applicable in any setting. Greenwood's model, Ernest Greenwood's 1957 classic article, Attributes of a Profession, provides another landmark in the evaluation of the professional status of social work. Greenwood mentions the following indicators of a profession. 1. A profession has fundamental knowledge and develops a systematic body of theory that directs the skills of practice. Educational preparation must be intellectual as well as practical. 2. Professional authority and credibility in the client-professional relationship are based on the use of professional judgment and competence. 3. A profession is empowered to regulate and control its own membership, professional practice, education, and performance standards. The community sanctions regulatory powers and professional privilege. 4. A profession has an enforceable, explicit, systematic, and binding regulatory code of ethics that compels ethical behavior by members of the profession. 5. A profession is guided by a culture of values, norms, and symbols within an organizational network of formal and informal groups through which the profession functions and performs its services. Using the above model, Greenwood contended in 1957 that social work is already a profession. It has too many points of congruence with the model to be classifiable. Otherwise, in more recent years, social work's professional status has been scrutinized by evaluating whether social work has the monopoly in the provision of social work services. Professional education. The first step in the effort to establish charity work as a profession was the establishment of training schools. Many social workers, notably Anna Dawes, 1893, and Mary Richmond, 1897, argued, through their published papers, for the need of education and training for personnel and the development and systemization of the accumulated knowledge and expertise gained by social workers. The Summer School of Philanthropy, a 6-week-long program under the sponsorship of the New York charity organization Society, which began in 1898, was a pioneering effort at formal professional education. Other cities, namely Chicago, Boston, Missouri, and Philadelphia, quickly followed New York's led and established professional schools for the training of charity workers. Let us now look at the emergence of social work education in more detail from the origins in Europe and its spread throughout the globe. 3.6 Social work education. The root of social work education can be traced to its international beginning in Britain and some countries in Europe towards the end of the 19th century. From Europe, the profession spread to United States, Africa, Asia and South America. Origins in Europe. Social work education evolved from the work of the Victorians in London who attempted to develop models of charity work and the first 2-year full-time teaching in social work as early as 1899 in Amsterdam. The Amsterdam Institute of Social Work Training is credited to be the first 2-year training program with theory and practice, though the very first school of social work was in Netherlands, The real beginnings of social work education are found in Octavia Hill's training of volunteers in housing management and friendly visiting in the 1870s. She worked in the slum neighborhoods of London and initially trained volunteers and later full-time workers. John Ruskin, an art critic, encouraged Octavia Hill in her work and financed her activities. The Barnetts, who founded Toynbee Hall for Men, were not interested in training. Hence, the initiative for training activities was taken by the women's settlements. Foremost among them being the Women's University Settlement established in 1887 in London by women graduates of Oxford and Cambridge. The training pioneered by this group evolved into organized courses and ultimately into professional education for social work. Another noteworthy beginning in Europe was the one-year training course in social work for young women initiated in Germany by Elise Salomon in 1899. Salomon, one of the founders of the International Association of Schools of Social Work, was an outstanding leader in social work education and women's rights. Her course in 1903 became the Elise Salomon School of Social Work, which was for many years the accepted model for social work education in Germany. The beginnings, thus made in Britain at the close of the 19th century, developed into organized education for social work in continental Europe and North America early in the 1900s and somewhat later in other continents. North America, a course entitled Summer School on Philanthropic Work heralded the beginning of professional education for social work in the U.S. It was inspired by Mary Richmond and organized by the charity organization Society of New York. The course consisted of lectures, discussions, conducting inquiries, visiting agencies and institutions, and working under the supervision of experienced agency guides. The course evolved into a one-year program in 1904 as the New York School of Philanthropy and in 1911. It added a second year. Similarly, in Chicago, the Hull House and the Chicago Commons in collaboration with University of Chicago organized a course in 1903, which a year later became the Chicago Institute of Social Sciences. In 1920, it was renamed as the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration, the first autonomous graduate school of social work within a university. Other continents. In later years, the pioneering efforts of Europe and US spread to South America, Africa, Asia and Australia. South America. In South America, the first school was launched in 1925 by two remarkable men, Dr. René Sand of Belgium and Dr. Alejandro del Rio of Chile. Both were physicians, pioneers in social medicine and social welfare. The school, later renamed the Alejandro del Rio School of Social Work, offered a two-year program. The curriculum was heavily weighted with subjects and field placements related to health. As the school flourished, many of its graduates became the pioneers of social work education throughout Latin America. Africa. In South Africa, schools patterned on the British model were established since 1924. The first institution was a three-year diploma at the Cape Town and Transvaal University College. The first degree course was established at the University of Stellenbosch in 1932. The early South African schools, with a few exceptions, were admitting only white students. The first school to qualify non-white students as social workers was the Jan H. Hofmeyr School of Social Work established by the YMCA in Johannesburg in 1947. Hofmeyr, a philanthropist and a member of parliament, and Dr. Ray Phillips, a missionary, were responsible for the school. Many graduates of the school, of whom Winnie Mandela was one, were found in government, politics, and Social Welfare Agencies (C) Asia. The first institution to be established in Asia was the Department of Sociology and Social Work, Yenching University in 1922. It was a four-year course with a Bachelor of Arts degree. However, it did not survive the Communist Revolution and, therefore, suspended. Hence, the credit of starting the first school of social work in Asia goes to Tata Institute of Social Sciences, which was established in 1936 and became a university in 1964. Clifford Manshart, an American missionary from Chicago, established the Nagpada Neighborhood House in Bombay and later collaborated with the Sir Dorabji Tata Trust in housing the school in his institution and becoming its first director. His collaborator Dr. J. M. Kumarappa, a well-known educator with MA and PhD degrees from Columbia University, later followed as the first Indian director of the institute. The one difference, on account of historical reasons, from the American and British pattern, is that the Indian schools of social work included labor welfare and personnel management within the curriculum course. Australia initially developed a social work tradition largely derivative of UK and USA models and has only lately developed more indigenous theory, practice and publication. The first social work training institutes, numbering 5, were established outside universities prior to World War II between 1929 and 1937 in the cities of Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. These first schools offered general social work training via a 2-year undergraduate course and a 1-year medical social work specialization which could be taken after the general training. The early leaders of these programs were largely British women trained in medical and psychiatric social work. In Australia, the practice of social work is largely carried out under government auspice and to a lesser degree under non-government, voluntary, and religious auspice. Approximately 2/3 of social workers are employed by federal and state government social service agencies, while the remaining 1/3 are employed in a variety of non-government and religious organizations. 3.7 The rise of professional organizations to expedite job placement for their graduates. Several women's colleges established a professional organization, the Intercollegiate Bureau of Occupations, in New York City in 1911. A further impetus for forming professional associations came from social work educators attempting to gain acceptance in the academic community. As specialty areas emerged, other professional associations like the American Association of Medical Social Workers, 1918, the National Association of School Social Workers, 1919, and the Association for the Study of Community Organization, 1946, were formed. National Association of Social Workers, in a quest for professional unity. Various social work organizations merged in 1955 to form the National Association of Social Workers, NASW. With a membership of over 100,000, NASW is currently the largest social work organization in the world. Full membership in NASW is available to graduates of accredited social work programs of the Council on Social Work Education, CSWE, at the bachelor's and master's degree level. Associate membership in NASW is available to other human service practitioners. As a membership association, NASW provides support and resources to social work practitioners, promotes professional development, establishes practice standards and a code of ethics, and promotes the humanitarian ideals and values of social work. Council of Social Work Education, the Council of Social Work Education, CSWE, formed in 1950 to become the standard-setting organization for social work education. Although initially charged with accrediting master's degree programs, The CSWE has been concerned since 1974 with all levels of social work education, including preparation for the baccalaureate degree. As of 2000, the Council on Social Work Education, CSWE, accredited 421 BSW programs and 139 MSW programs. CSWE's purpose, to promote high-quality social work education, is achieved through the accreditation of programs, conferences for educators, professional development activities, task force work on educational programming, and the publication of journals. 3.8 Current trends and practices. The profession of social work has firmly established itself in many countries, and the demand for trained social workers is ever increasing. Social workers today practice in a variety of settings: hospitals, mental health and community centers, schools, social service agencies, employment settings, courts and correctional settings. In private practice, they provide clinical or diagnostic testing services covering a wide range of personal disorders. Although most social workers are employed in cities or suburbs, some work in rural areas. Career avenues. Employment of social workers is expected to increase faster than the average for all occupations. The elderly population is increasing rapidly, resulting in job growth among geriatric social workers. In addition, continuing concern about crime, juvenile delinquency, and services for the mentally ill, the mentally retarded, the physically disabled, AIDS patients, and individuals and families in crisis will spur demand for social workers. Other career options for social workers include teaching, research, and consulting. Some also help formulate government policies by analyzing and advocating policy positions in government agencies and in research institutions. Another emerging area for career is in corporate social responsibility legal regulation, licensing. To restrict the practice of social work to qualified practitioners, the profession had followed the lead of older professions and advocated for the passage of licensing laws. As of 1994, social work is regulated in all states and territories of the U.S., licensed in 47 and registered in the other 6. In 33 states and the District of Columbia, social workers are eligible to receive third-party reimbursements. Licensing, however, is opposed on the ground that it is elitist and that it is not exclusive enough. Whether licensing is a good thing or not, in today's situation, licensing is the ultimate indication of whether an occupation is a profession. Privatization of social work practice. Traditionally, social work had been practiced in either government or private non-profit agencies. However, a growing number of social workers are now practicing in private, fee-for-service settings and in private for-profit businesses. Private fee-for-service organizations are practice organizations that are typical of those used by professionals, such as physicians and lawyers, in which social workers provide services, generally counseling or therapy, for an hourly fee. Private for-profit businesses employing or owned by social workers that have expanded include drug and alcohol treatment programs, nursing homes, eating disorder clinics, adult day care centers, and companion services. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated that the number of social workers who are self-employed will increase by about 20% between 1990 and 2005. 3.9 Summary. We have seen how social work as a profession emerged from the charity orientation of the church to the state's role in public welfare. The movements and organizations, which originated in Great Britain, were replicated in the United States when the English colonists settled there. The profession then spread to other continents and schools of social work providing BSW and MSW degrees or diploma in some cases, were established in many universities across the world. The challenge to social work and social work education today is to hold on to its beliefs and values, remain flexible to changing times, and to stand up for social justice and human rights. Social work, which has grown and adjusted to changing circumstances for over a century, will continue to grow and change in the years to come and be able to face with confidence the needs and challenges of the millennium. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.